My name is Claire Donovan. For the last 7 years, I worked harder than anyone else in the company. I wasn't born into power, I didn't have connections, and no one handed me my position. I earned it. Every late night, every contract I pulled across the finish line, every mess I quietly fixed without recognition, it was all mine. I became the person senior executives relied on when real problems needed solutions. So when the CEO announced his son, Adrian, would be joining as deputy director, I already knew what was coming. Nepotism never needed an introduction, it walked into the office with entitlement plastered across its face. And Adrian? He was the pure embodiment of it. From his very first day, he walked through the halls like he owned them, issuing orders without understanding a single process. He wanted admiration without effort, respect without contribution. I tolerated him because I had no choice. I was professional, I did my job, and I reminded myself that my work spoke louder than his arrogance. But arrogance doesn't stay quiet. It tests boundaries. One Monday morning, during our weekly executive briefing, he crossed the line. The CEO had stepped out briefly, leaving the boardroom filled with senior managers and directors. Adrian walked in late, deliberately, coffee cup in hand, and paused at the doorway. He didn't greet anyone. He simply stood there, waiting. Slowly, some of the junior managers rose to their feet, awkwardly offering him the kind of deference usually reserved for the CEO himself. Adrian smirked, clearly enjoying the display. And then his eyes fell on me. I remained seated. He tilted his head. "Claire," he said smoothly, "aren't you forgetting something?" The room went silent. Everyone looked at me. I glanced at him and then back at my notes. "I don't believe so," I said evenly. His smirk twisted into irritation. "You're not going to stand?" I closed my folder calmly. "Respect is earned here. It isn't demanded." Gasps rippled across the room. Some managers tried to hide their expressions, others looked terrified. Adrian's face flushed, and for the first time, his mask of arrogance cracked. "You're finished," he hissed. "As of this moment, you're done." I could feel the fear settle in the room. He didn't have the authority to terminate me, not officially, but he had something worse, the CEO's name. And in companies like ours, that was often more powerful than any contract. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply gathered my things, slid my folder into my bag, and stood. "Understood," I said. My voice didn't shake. I walked out, my heels echoing down the polished floor, leaving behind a room full of silent witnesses who would never dare to challenge him. By the time I reached my office, HR had already been notified. My email access was cut off, and security was waiting outside my door with a box. Adrian didn't waste time. He wanted to humiliate me, strip me of dignity, and show everyone that defiance meant destruction. I took the box without a word. The guard didn't look at me. They never do. But what Adrian didn't realize, and what no one in that room knew, was that I had been preparing for this kind of moment for years. Because I understood something Adrian never would, loyalty in business has an expiration date. And when you dedicate 7 years of your life to a company, you learn exactly where the weaknesses are buried. I packed quietly, but in my mind, every humiliation I'd swallowed over the years replayed like fuel. The raise denied because the budget was tight, while executives cashed bonuses. The projects I saved at the last second without my name mentioned once in the report. The times my ideas were dismissed until someone else repeated them, louder, and took credit. And now, this final insult, being fired not for incompetence, not for failure, but for refusing to bend to arrogance. Adrian thought this was his victory. To him, it was the end of my career. To me, it was the start of something else entirely. That afternoon, I didn't go home to cry. I didn't drown myself in self-pity. I went straight to my apartment, pulled out a locked drawer, and laid the documents across my desk. Contracts. Amendments. Confidential memos. Copies of agreements I had helped negotiate and finalize, agreements the company still depended on. And right there, in black and white, was the leverage Adrian had no clue existed. 7 years ago, when the company was clawing its way out of near bankruptcy, I had been the one who secured a critical partnership deal. I wasn't just the negotiator, I had been written into the contract itself as a continuity officer. At the time, it was considered symbolic recognition for my contribution. But over the years, as executives shuffled and investors came and went, everyone forgot that clause existed. Everyone except me. That clause stated that if I were removed from my position without cause, the partnership could be terminated at the discretion of the other party. And that partnership? It was worth more than half the company's revenue stream. I sat back in my chair, running my hand across the document. Adrian had just pulled the trigger on his own downfall, and he didn't even know it. But this wasn't about revenge for the sake of satisfaction. It was about precision. Timing. Making sure the humiliation he tried to inflict on me would come back to him multiplied. I wasn't going to rush. I wasn't going to shout. I was going to be silent, deliberate, and devastating. By evening, word of my firing had already spread. Messages pinged my phone, colleagues expressing shock but not surprise, whispers of support that would never be spoken out loud. In corporate corridors, loyalty isn't to people, it's to survival. They would save themselves before they'd ever stand up for me. That was fine. I didn't need them. Because I already had what mattered most, the one piece of paper Adrian's arrogance had overlooked. And as I stared at it under the dim light of my apartment, I felt no despair. Only clarity. He thought firing me in front of everyone was his moment of triumph. The next morning, the office felt heavier than usual. Adrian walked the halls with a smug sense of victory, the same arrogance as yesterday, confident that his display of power had settled any doubts about his authority. But I wasn't there to witness it in person. My presence had been removed physically, but mentally, I was more embedded than ever. Every decision, every document, every potential weakness in the company ran through my mind like a blueprint for what was to come. I started by reviewing the contracts I had kept copies of, years of negotiations, partnerships, and clauses that no one remembered but me. Every amendment, every stipulation, every minor legal footnote that had been overlooked became a potential lever. I highlighted each one, calculated the timing, and noted who would need to be contacted first. This wasn't about emotional revenge, it was about precision and strategy. Every move had to be deliberate. By mid-morning, I drafted a carefully worded email to the external partner company that controlled the largest portion of our revenue stream. The company had always trusted me because I had handled the initial negotiations personally, and my professionalism was well known. I reminded them of the contract clause, framed it neutrally, and simply stated the conditions under which the agreement could be reconsidered. No anger, no threats, just the facts. While I worked, I could hear snippets from former colleagues. Whispers, guesses, rumors. No one dared speak openly. Some were sympathetic, others were anxious about how the situation would unfold. In corporate environments, silence speaks louder than words. I let them chatter. Their fear was my ally. Adrian, unaware, was already making mistakes. He sent directives to teams he didn't understand, ordered changes in projects without consulting the necessary managers, and attempted to rewrite processes he barely knew. His impatience was his weakness. Every rash email, every poorly thought-out decision, was a mark in my mental ledger. I didn't need to act immediately. I only needed to wait and ensure that each error accumulated, invisible but undeniable. By afternoon, I arranged a private meeting with one of the senior executives who had previously worked closely with me. Not to complain, not to demand, but to subtly remind them of the continuity clause in our contracts and the value of the partnership I had personally maintained. I framed it as a professional concern, keeping emotion out entirely. They listened, their expressions betraying just enough recognition to confirm my leverage was real. Every move I made was calculated. I didn't want confrontation, I wanted inevitability. Adrian would believe his victory was secure, that his arrogance had gone unchecked. But each step I took was a silent trap, carefully layered so that once triggered, there would be no escape. That evening, I reviewed the financial impact of the contract clause. If invoked, the partnership could disrupt revenue streams, trigger renegotiations, and expose lapses in oversight, all directly tied to Adrian's reckless assumptions. The more I ran the numbers, the clearer it became, he had overplayed his hand in ways he could never foresee. While the office speculated on my absence, I prepared my next step, indirect communication with the partner company's legal team. I presented the contract details as neutral information, not as an ultimatum. This gave me two advantages. It established credibility without aggression and planted the first seeds of doubt about the company's current leadership structure. Any external partner who values stability would pause at such details, and that hesitation would be amplified once internal incompetence was observed. By the end of the day, I leaned back and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Not because Adrian had lost yet, but because the foundation of my plan was complete. Every piece was in place: external awareness, internal leverage, and the inevitability of exposure. He believed he had fired me to assert power, but in reality, he had activated the very mechanism that would lead to his downfall. As I closed my laptop, a thought struck me: patience was as crucial as preparation. Corporate revenge isn't about immediate gratification, it's about timing, sequence, and the subtle pressure that ensures mistakes become irreversible. I had 7 years of knowledge, relationships, and documented evidence in my corner. That was more than enough. By the third day after my termination, the office atmosphere had shifted subtly. Adrian strutted around, still wearing his smug confidence, but there were small changes he hadn't noticed. Teams hesitated, projects stalled, and emails that once moved smoothly now lingered unanswered. Every delay, every overlooked task, fed the silent avalanche I had set in motion. From my apartment, I monitored the situation closely. I had built relationships with key decision-makers, external partners, and legal contacts over the 7 years. They trusted me, they respected my judgment, and most importantly, they knew I understood the contracts better than anyone else in the company. My communication with the partner company had done its job. Subtle reminders of the continuity clause and the importance of my role had created quiet uncertainty. That uncertainty was already rippling through the CEO's operations. Adrian, meanwhile, remained oblivious. He sent a flurry of emails, demanded progress reports, and held impromptu meetings with managers. He wanted to show he was in control, but control is meaningless without knowledge. Every rash decision he made amplified the vulnerabilities I had cataloged over the years. By midweek, a senior manager contacted me discreetly. She didn't ask for favors, she simply shared what she could without incriminating herself. "Things are not going well," she said, her voice tense. "There are gaps Adrian doesn't understand. Projects he's pushed forward are now stalling. Some clients have started asking questions." I didn't know who else to tell. I smiled quietly to myself. That was the sound of the first domino falling. Every action I had taken, subtle, calculated, patient, was now producing results. The partner company had begun internal discussions about the risks of the contract with my removal. They hadn't acted yet, but the uncertainty was enough to unsettle internal leadership. And that uncertainty was now cascading into the company's operations. I documented everything meticulously. Emails, memos, reports, timelines, everything I had in my possession would serve as undeniable evidence if needed. But my goal wasn't to rush the exposure, it was to let Adrian unravel on his own, to let his incompetence amplify the leverage I already held. By Thursday afternoon, the first signs of panic began to appear in Adrian's behavior. He was calling meetings more frequently, double-checking tasks he usually ignored, and overcompensating in areas that were never his responsibility. His arrogance was being replaced with agitation, though no one dared point it out to him directly. That evening, I drafted a concise message to the partner company, summarizing my role in the initial agreement and politely reminding them of the continuity clause. I kept it neutral, strictly professional. No anger, no confrontation, just facts. I knew that by presenting myself as calm and reliable, I was reinforcing the perception that Adrian's leadership was unstable in comparison. As I pressed send, I leaned back and allowed myself a rare moment of satisfaction. The seeds were planted. The first cracks were forming. And all it had taken was patience, strategy, and 7 years of preparation. The following day, whispers began circulating inside the company. Minor delays, overlooked procedures, and miscommunications were traced back to Adrian's directives. Managers who once flinched under his gaze now hesitated, unsure whether his commands were sound. His image of invincibility was eroding faster than he could comprehend. By Friday afternoon, the partner company sent a formal inquiry, requesting clarification about my removal and the current leadership's authority to enforce the agreement. The email was polite, neutral, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Every word highlighted the seriousness of the continuity clause. Every question emphasized that the company's future revenue was contingent on competent management. Adrian's phone buzzed continuously. He read the emails, his face draining of color. For the first time, he realized that his impulsive actions had consequences far beyond his understanding. Panic was replacing arrogance. I didn't celebrate. I maintained professional composure. I knew that a misstep now could ruin everything I had orchestrated. This wasn't about personal satisfaction yet, it was about the inevitability of exposure. Adrian's arrogance had created the perfect opening, and I was watching it unfold exactly as I had planned. By the end of the week, internal whispers had grown louder. Senior executives, quietly alarmed by the partner company's inquiry, began reviewing projects, financial statements, and contracts. Adrian's mistakes, once invisible, were now under scrutiny. And all of it traced back to the single decision he had made in the boardroom, firing me for refusing to stand in respect. I sat in my apartment, reviewing reports, highlighting errors, and preparing my next move. The tension was building, and I could feel the shift in power. Adrian was still in the building, still wearing the mask of authority, but the foundations were cracking. I had created a storm without stepping into the office. Without confrontation. Without a single angry word. By the time the weekend arrived, I allowed myself a faint smile. Adrian's first domino had fallen, and he hadn't even noticed. Next week, the chain reaction would accelerate, and his arrogance would turn into the very thing he feared most, exposure and accountability. By Monday morning, the atmosphere in the office had shifted completely. Adrian's once confident strides were now hesitant, his phone buzzing non-stop with messages he didn't know how to handle. The partner company's inquiries had escalated, and internal executives were reviewing every decision he had made since taking over. His arrogance had become his undoing. I returned to the office quietly, not as a defeated employee, but as the unseen force controlling the outcome. Security and HR barely recognized me as I walked past them. I didn't need confrontation, I only needed presence. The documents I had safeguarded for years now had authority, legitimacy, and the power to shift the balance. Adrian was summoned to a meeting with the CEO and the board. I watched discreetly as he entered, confident as ever, only to find the room's mood tense and unsympathetic. Questions were pointed, timelines scrutinized, and his decisions examined under the cold light of accountability. Every rash order, every oversight, every attempt to rewrite processes without experience was laid bare. When the CEO glanced at me from across the room, There was a subtle acknowledgement, a silent recognition that the oversight had been monumental. I didn't speak. I didn't act. I let the evidence, the contracts, and Adrian's own arrogance do the work. By mid-afternoon, the board's decision was clear. Adrian's role was curtailed, responsibilities reassigned, and his authority sharply limited. The partner company formally reaffirmed their contractual requirements, emphasizing that continuity and competence were non-negotiable. The message was unmistakable: Adrian had overstepped, and the consequences were irreversible. I stood in the corner of the room, calm and composed, feeling the tension dissolve into clarity. Every action I had taken, 7 years of effort, careful documentation, and calculated patience, had culminated in this moment. The arrogance that once humiliated me had become the very mechanism of Adrian's undoing. Later, in my office, I allowed myself a deep breath. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and humiliated. But through strategy, professionalism, and patience, I had reclaimed control. No shouting. No personal attacks. Just precision. By the end of the week, the company stabilized under competent oversight. Adrian remained in a diminished role, constantly aware that every misstep would be noticed and scrutinized. I, on the other hand, had regained not just my position, but respect, authority, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that true power lies in preparation, knowledge, and composure. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. Victory wasn't loud. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of anger. It was about turning humiliation into leverage, arrogance into accountability, and betrayal into opportunity. And in the end, that is the only kind of victory that lasts.